Hi, welcome back to the Megaleh. We've been through all the Tishrei holidays. We are now Bein Hazmanim, beginning the cycle of reading the Torah again anew, starting from Bereshis, from the very beginning. So it's a new opportunity to learn and grow and share. Really happy to be back on track. I've been inspired recently. I read a great book by Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, really great man, brilliant intellectual, wonderful rabbi and Jewish leader, and a light into the nations. He was called by the Prince of Wales. So, of course, he passed away this past year, early. He wasn't a very old man. He had been sick, I guess. Anyway, I want to carry on his legacy a little bit. I have a number of Divrei Torah that he's inspired me. His book is called Not in God's Name. I'll show it to you coming up. And he really sheds new light on well-known biblical passages, stories, and brilliant ideas, concepts for coexistence between religions, and just to be a Jew and to be a person, to be a mensch in this day and age, this late stage of the game. So again, I want to share some of my excitement and new ideas that I got from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. So today's lecture is called "What's Wrong with Cain's Sacrifice?" And we'll review the story. Again, we're starting from Bereshis. We're in the very beginning. Oops. So here it is. So I have a picture here of the sacrifices of Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel in Hebrew. And you see that Hevel's sacrifice, the smoke is going up to the heavens, accepted by God, and Cain's, he's miserable because his sacrifice was not accepted by God. We have to know why not. I wrote here conceived in sin. I'm not using that in a traditional Christian sense, but as I do have a new insight, even going a little bit further than Rabbi Sacks, into what made Cain into what he was. So let me review the story with everybody. V'adam yada es Chava ishto v'tahar v'teilet es Cain v'toimer kanisi ish es Adonai. So this is the biblical knowing. Adam knew his wife, and she conceived, and she gave birth to Cain. And she said, and here's the key words, I put them in bold, Kaniti ish es Hashem. Now, es in this usage, I believe, means with. So what she says is, I'm going to translate kaniti right now as I have acquired. I have acquired a man. Ish, it's a funny word, but it is a man. So I've acquired a man with God. And that's very, very important. Again, this is the first woman's sense of having given birth to a child. So it's a very dramatic event. Childbirth is very dramatic. And it's a new person on the scene. God created just two people, and here now there's a third. And I think part of the crux of the issue here is that Chava feels a sense of independence from her husband. She doesn't say, honey, we have a baby. She says, I have a man, okay? I've acquired a man with God. So she recognizes God's role in this process, right? Our sages teach us that Gimel Shutfim, there are three partners in the creation of a baby, man, woman, and a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But here, Chava doesn't include Adam, her husband. She includes herself and God. And so I feel that there's a certain sort of jealousy that's coming out, like, I was taken out of my husband, right? Adam's rib, side, tail, whatever, wherever Chava came from, she came from her husband. And now a person has come from her. So she's now sort of become equivalent to her husband as she becomes Aim Kol Chai. She's the mother of life. But here she's focusing on Kaniti Ish Es Hashem. I've acquired a man along with God. So I think that's really important, that she sees her child as an acquisition, as something to have, okay? And I think that's again, this is Rabbi Sacks' idea, that's the defining characteristic of Cain and the meaning of his name. The meaning of his name is the word kinyan, which is an acquisition. And God is called koinei shamayim va'aretz. He's the master, the ruler, the acquirer, the owner of the heavens and the earth. So there's something important, of course, about kinyanim, about property, about ownership, but it becomes the defining characteristic for Cain, and we're going to see that where that leads, and it's not a good place. Anyway, continuing again with the background story, but Toisef Laletis es Achiv es Havel, Vayihevel ro'etzon v'Kayin haya oved adama. She has another, she continues to give birth, and she has his brother, and his name in Hebrew is Havel, and that's really important. We're going to explain what that word means, but in English, it's just translated as able, which is not like able to do stuff. It's A-V-E-L, whatever that means. Vayi Havel, he was a shepherd of sheep. And Cain is an oived adama, that means he's a farmer. So this is really important dichotomy. Havel is involved with chattel, okay, with movable objects, in this case, livestock. And his brother Cain is the owner of the earth. He's a farmer. So you have the farmers and the ranchers, if you know from Oklahoma. And so there's going to be strife here. There's going to be conflict. Who owns the land? Who owns the stuff? And there's midrashic material here that Cain says, get off the earth, it's all mine. And Hevel says, well, everything movable is mine, so your clothes belong to me. Sounds sort of petty and extreme, but you know, there's such a thing as sibling rivalry, and it can be really intense. And this is the beginning of it. And of course, it ends bad with fratricide. Cain, of course, going to kill his brother Abel momentarily. Anyway, there's a period of time, Chazal maybe say 50 days. Cain gets God, okay? He knows that it's appropriate. Maybe he initiates the idea of offering a sacrifice to God. Chazal have it that Adam Rishon already offered a sacrifice on the first day he was created. But again, this is beautiful religious initiative on the part of Cain. And that's really our question today. What's wrong with this sacrifice? So we're going to see momentarily. But he took from the fruits of the field, of the earth, and he brought it as a gift or offering to God. Chazal actually say it was pishtan. He offered some flax. Okay, maybe not the best choice, not very glamorous, but that's what he brought, pri Adama. Hevel, his brother Hevel, maybe sees that Cain is making a sacrifice to God and thinks, hey, that's a good idea. Well, what does he bring? Hevel hevi gamuhu mi b'choros tzoino u'michelveim b'isha Adonai el Hevel ve'el minchaso. So again, Hevel, it says gamhu. He also did it, which does imply that he learned from his brother, but he brings a much nicer korban. His korban is mi b'choros, from the firstborn of his sheep, u'michelveim, the fat ones. Okay, a juicy lamb or something like that. He brings a sacrifice, and God accepts it. V'yisha, God, let's say, is attentive to the offering of Hevel. Ve'el Kayin ve'el minchaso lo sha'ah. But to Cain's offering, Hashem is not attentive. He's not appreciative. And that, you can imagine how much that's frustrating to Cain. I was the first one to bring a korban. Vayichar leKain ma'od v'yiplu panav. So he's essentially depressed and angry. Vayomer Adonai el Kohen lama charaloch ve'lama lafnu panecha. God addresses Cain and says, why are you mad? And why are you depressed? Hello, im teitiv says, ve'im lo seitiv lapetach chatas roivetz ve'lecha chukasoi v'atatum shalbo. So God teaches Cain a really major lesson about ethos and even, big words about the relationship between man and God. And that your concept, Cain, and your offering was totally off base, off target. And you need to change your attitude and understand that there's a moral universe and that you can't bribe the gods. You have to recognize the difference between right and wrong and listen to your conscience, okay? So I'm going to get into that further between Cain's inappropriate intent. And again, that's from Rabbi Sachs. He basically says like this, that Cain was offering something to God because he knew God was more powerful than himself. Cain says, look, my mom got me as an acquisition, and now I'm the owner of the earth and a lot of stuff. And so I need to give some of my stuff to God because he's more powerful. And if I give him some stuff, then in exchange, he'll give me some of his power. So he's brokering a deal, okay? And God says, that's pagan, okay? That is how you deal when there's lots of gods and you need to get something from one. So you want to bribe him, pay him off. But I am the master of the universe. I created the whole thing and I didn't need to, but I did because I love you and I'm here for you and I want to have dialogue and connection. So I want you to walk in my ways, be like me, be a good person. I want you to overcome your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination. If you do that, then you will be a ruler. The atatim shalbo. Then you'll be a ruler if you learn how to rule yourself. But if you think you can just pay your way out of trouble and bribe powerful beings or even deities in order to get your way, that's a bad thing and it's not going to work. Whereas Hevel, let me explain now what Hevel's name means. Hevel is when you breathe out on a cold morning. Okay, we're in October now, first day of October. So I'm in Israel, it's still warm. But if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and if you're in Cleveland today, where my parents are, and you breathe out, you'll probably see your breath. And what is that? Of course, it's water vapor in the cold air, so that's why it's visible. But that's called Hevel, okay? And so it's your exhalation. It's an expression of your living soul. Let's recall where we got our soul, where we got the capacity to breathe. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. God breathed breath into man and gave him a living soul. God formulated man from the dust of the earth and he created the shape or the form of a man, but then he breathed into him the soul of life. And so now we're breathing, we're alive. And that breath of life, that's called Hevel. Okay, so it's sort of spiritual, it's evanescent. You can't capture it, okay? You can't bottle it. You can't, hold on to it forever. You know that it's sort of borrowed. It's really the breath of God. And I'm breathing it through me and within me, but I'm not the master of it, okay? I'm a partner in it to some degree. So that's who Hevel is. And he recognizes that. So Hevel is a spiritualist. He is not a materialist. And Cain is about stuff, okay, about acquisitions. He himself was an acquisition of his mother, and he's trying to make acquisitions and make deals and get more stuff and power. And Hevel is breathing and living with God and sharing the atmosphere with spiritual beings. That's what Hevel's about. So let me go on with the paradigm here. So I have a piece of art, that I'm partial to Chagall, great Jewish artist of the 20th century, Russian Jew. This one's called The Triumph of Music, okay? And there's a bunch of musicians in here. Music was a big part of shtetl life. You may know that I'm a little bit of a musician, amateur musician. And so that's here my representation of the world of Hevel, the world of spirituality, art, things which are not concrete, okay? And I put here to symbolize the world of Cain, an ancient rock quarry. It's actually in Egypt, because Hevel's about stuff which is concrete, like stone. And the Vilna Gaon actually has a piece I read years ago of that whenever Cain and Abel meet, Cain will always kill Hevel, okay? If you bring a violinist and a guy from a rock quarry and you make a fight between them, so guess who's going to win the fight, right? The big tough guy from the rock quarry is going to smash the guy with the violin and he will cease to exist. But his music might live on forever. I don't know if you know, there's an Italian convert. He's taken pieces of music written in the camps of the Holocaust and written on anything, but there were, so many Jewish composers, and not world-class composers, but Jews who were musicians. So many Jews brought violins, to Auschwitz and to the death camps. There's a guy in Israel who's also, his life's work is restoring those violins. But anyway, I'm talking sort of about the eternity and the power to overcome of music, spirituality, art, the world of the intellect, of the spirit, as opposed to the world of even the body and of materialism, that you could get a lot of stuff and you could have a lot of power, but it won't last, okay? It could last, your lifetime, and you could give your kids a lot of money, but doesn't last forever. At the end, we all return to the earth. So I wanted to share an idea, very, very powerful idea and we learned about it in yeshiva. It's called Bittul Hayesh, okay? And literally translated, I would say that's nullification of substance. But it's sort of a philosophical, it was part of the Musar movement of taking all that is in a most material and concrete way and sort of giving up on it, withdrawing a little bit from it to the world of the spirit, the world of Avodas Hashem, of serving God through prayer and Torah study. And recently I gave a class about binary, zeros and ones, the base 2 number system. And so I want to use it again today in a little bit different way. We're, of course, starting again from Bereshis, the very beginning of the Torah. And our sages divide up human history. They say it's a 6,000-year period, basically. Shis Alfi Halve Alma. This world will last 6,000 years. We're in the year 5882. So not too much longer to go. You better do the right thing fast because the end is near. But the first 2,000, they divide the 6,000-year period into 3 2,000-year epics. And the first one is called Tohu, and then Torah, and then Yemois Mashiach. So the first one is a mess, okay? It's confusion because the Torah hadn't been given. So it wasn't clear to these early generations of Adam and Methuselah and all these people, how are you supposed to be a mensch? How are you supposed to be a good or great person? It was not clear, and mostly people did not deliver the goods. They failed. These were generations of failure. In Pirkei Avos, they teach us 20 generations till Avraham Avinu, till the great patriarch Abraham, and they were all wicked, okay, and punished and essentially destroyed. So we're talking about that historical period when the Torah hasn't been given yet, and so the world is a mess, and there's not clear approach or understanding of what is the way of God. So that's this very early stage of history. And again, before that, even when the world was being created, I took us through some stages, if you will, in the mind of God, where there was a stage with the world, again, before the creation of even of the physical world, there was a world of binary. Okay, let's call it of data. And the most simple data of yesh ve'ayin, there is and there isn't, zeros and ones, okay? God's presence and his absence, what's called kav v'tzimtzum. And so now we're in the very, the first generation, and now the F1 generation, the first filial generation, that's Cain and Abel. And so in this understanding, I want to sort of use the zeros as Hevel and the ones as Cain. Previously, I had said that the ones are giving and the zeros are stopping. So it's Midas HaChesed and Midas HaGvura. But I want to use it differently, same paradigm today, but using it in a different understanding, that Cain is the ones, he's the yesh, he is stuff, okay? So he is the owner of the earth and of everything concrete and substantive. And Hevel is like the breath, okay? So the breath is not concrete, it's evanescent, and it is something that you can't grasp, okay? It's spiritual. And so Hevel's the zeros and Cain's the ones. And the fascinating thing here is that although Hevel is, of course, killed by Cain and his life doesn't last long and he, in a sense, does not amount to much, but here's some important information that you don't know. And that is that the soul of Hevel keeps coming back. And the truth is Cain also keeps coming back. Cain and Hevel, the sages, particularly in the Kabbalah, they teach us about reincarnation of souls, and the souls of Cain and Hevel do keep showing up many times. I won't go through the many iterations right now, but certainly in the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu is a key Gilgul reincarnation of Hevel. Okay, Noach had that soul, Shes has part of it, but Moshe Rabbeinu, I think, is probably the strongest and really mostly the completion of the mission of Hevel. Hevel is the man of spirit, like Moshe Rabbeinu is called Ish Elokim. So Hevel has God's spirit. That's what he's named for, the spirit, okay, the breath of life of God. And so if Hevel himself was killed by Cain, because that's the nature of things, when something physical meets something spiritual, the physical crushes the spiritual. That's why it's so hard to be a spiritualist in this world, because the world is so physical. But Hevel's spirit does have a certain triumph in the long run. And that's, Chagall's paintings here, it's called the triumph of music. Ultimately, great ideas do outlast, guns and material power. So, I'm a big believer in that. I've devoted my life to that idea, that it's not about accumulation of wealth and power, it's about the living spirit. So that is Hevel's, in a sense, victory over Cain, even though in the short term, he got crushed. So here it is. This is the book from Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, winner of the Templeton Prize, a truly great man, a wonderful intellectual and leader for our age. And this book is called Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, of course, a super important theme and topic at this time, confronting all the people that are killing in the name of God and the God of Abraham, right? And so he has really important ideas about this. So let me share with you his words. And then I've told you how I've taken them a little bit further. He says that Eve unwittingly gave her eldest son a name that would eventually lead him to murder. So Rabbi Sacks said it was unwitting, but I've said it was more than that, that Eve named Cain, meaning acquisition, because she felt a sense of acquisition. I now have something that I didn't really get from my husband. Now, of course, she was impregnated by her husband, and I don't want to go into it. There are those that say she was impregnated. I'm not going to go there. But anyway, but she, in her statement, she says, Kaniti ish es Hashem. She says, I acquired this man with God. Okay, and so she feels a sense of independence from her husband, and I think that's part of the problem here. But anyway, Rabbi Sacks says it's unwitting that she gave her eldest son a name that would lead him to murder. How is that? Cain represents the idea that what I own gives me power. When I give some of what I own to God in the form of a sacrifice, I am doing so in order to receive in return some of his power. Okay, I'll give you something, God, if you give me something back. That is pagan sacrifice. So that's such an important understanding, and I think it's really missing today. I'm in a community and I get all this outreach to give charity, and they tell me, give charity and you'll get a bracha. Your children will be this and you'll get wealth and so on and so forth. They want me to give them something so I'll get something back. And, it happens on the phone. They call me on the phone, or maybe I even call them to make a donation. And they say, well, do you want us to pray for you and to offer you this and give you that? And I'm like, no, I didn't call you to get something. I called you to give something. And there is a distinction. Chazal say, Hanoisin staka al-menash yichya b'ni harezit tzadik gamur. So because of the nature of the Jewish people, which is, again, 2,000 years later after the story of Cain and Abel, so Jewish people are fundamentally good. And if they do a mitzvah to get something out of the mitzvah, that's called shelo lishma. And we know shamitoich shelo lishma ba lishma. If you do a mitzvah for an ulterior motive or a bad reason, you should still do it. And ultimately, that will lead to doing mitzvahs for a good reason. That's all well and good, and it's all true. But again, we're at an earlier stage of history and on a more fundamental level, and not just talking about Jews. So basically, you should do the right thing, not to get something from it, but just because it's the right thing. And if you're trying to get something, that's essentially pagan, okay? A way of propitiating, cajoling, or bribing the gods. That is not how to do it. You should be like God and be a wonderful human being in the image of God just because, okay? That kind of sacrifice God does not accept, and that's why he did not accept Cain's sacrifice, because Cain was basically offering a pagan style sacrifice, and God doesn't want it. The sacrifice he accepts, that of Abel Hevel, is one that comes from the humility of mortality, saying that, God, I am mere breath, I'm Hevel, but it is your breath that I breathe, not mine. Okay, what am I? So if we internalize that message of understanding who we are and what we're doing here, and that we're breathing the breath of life because God is sharing his breath with us, so we can do a real lot of wonderful things. not because then we'll get stuff and we'll become rich and famous and powerful. That's not what it's about. It's about walking with God, breathing his breath. So I thank you for being with me today, and I'm wishing you a Shana Tova, a good year. We say now a gesunte winter, a good healthy winter. It should be good for all of you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with me.